Hello and welcome to the Fireside Casebook, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, settle into your favorite chair, let the fire crackle, and allow me, Dr. John H. Watson, to carry you back to a London wrapped in frost and secrets. What you're about to hear is the full, unabridged chronicle of the strangest Yuletide puzzle ever laid before my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 1: The Snowbound Visitor. Pull your chair near the hearth, dear listener, for tonight I, Dr. John H. Watson, shall carry you back to a London so thick with snow that the very stars seem to have tumbled down in flakes. It was the 23rd of December, 1894, and the city lay muffled beneath a quilt of white so deep that even the muffin man's bell sounded like a ghost calling through cotton wool. I had just finished dressing the old Giselle wound in my shoulder, the one that still aches when the wind swings north, when three sharp raps struck the door of 221B Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson's voice floated up the stair. "Gentlemen, there's a young lady below who says she will perish if Mr. Holmes does not see her at once." Holmes, who had been reclining upon the sofa in his mouse-colored dressing gown, shot upright as though a spring had uncoiled. His eyes, gray and keen as winter steel, flashed toward the window where the snow swirled in spirals against the gas lamp. "Perish, Watson. Capital. Show her up, Mrs. Hudson, and be quick with the coal scuttle. Our visitor is half frozen." I opened the door myself, and in swept a figure that might have stepped from the frontispiece of a Christmas annual. A sealskin hood framed a face pale as the snow outside. Frost glittered on the lashes of eyes, the color of storm-tossed violets. Her traveling cloak, once bottle green, was now white with rime, and in her gloved hands she clutched a single crimson envelope sealed with a blob of mistletoe wax. She halted upon the turkey rug, swaying like a young birch in a gale. "Dr. Watson?" Her voice was low, musical, yet cracked with cold. "They told me at Bart's that you are the only man in London who can find a needle in a snowstorm. I beg you, no, I implore you, help me find a child." Holmes had already crossed the room in 3 silent strides. He took the lady's elbow with the gentle authority of a surgeon and guided her to the basket chair beside the fire. "Sit, madam. Watson, the brandy. And Mrs. Hudson, hot water, sugar, a dash of nutmeg. We must thaw both body and tail." I poured a finger of the 1824 Armagnac while Holmes knelt, unfastened the silver clasp of her cloak, and eased it from her shoulders. Beneath was a gown of dove-gray merino, high-necked, severe, yet cut with the elegance that speaks of Bond Street before misfortune. A tiny silver brooch shaped like a treble clef glinted at her throat. She accepted the glass with trembling fingers, drank, coughed, then fixed Holmes with a gaze that would have melted the frost on the window pane. "My name is Eleanor Wren. I am governess to the daughters of Sir Reginald Paget in Belgravia, but that is not why I come. It is my nephew, Timothy, my only living kin, who is lost." Holmes settled into the chair opposite, steepled his long fingers, and regarded her with that air of courteous attention which told me the game was afoot. "Pray begin at the beginning, Miss Wren. Omit no detail, however trivial. The snowflake that melts upon the glove may yet reveal the mountain whence it fell." She drew a breath that fluttered the ribbons of her bonnet. "Timothy is 10 years old, small for his age, with hair the color of ripe corn and a voice, ah, Mr. Holmes, such a voice, that the choir-master of St. Botolph's, Aldgate, declares is the purest treble in all England. Every Advent he sings the verse solo in Once in Royal David's City. Tonight was the final rehearsal before the great Christmas Eve service at St. Paul's. She paused, the fire crackled. Outside, a cab horse slipped on the ice and a driver cursed in colorful Billingsgate. Holmes merely waited, motionless save for the pulse beating in his thin throat. Rehearsal ended at 9, she continued. The boys were dismissed into the churchyard. Timothy begged leave to watch the lamplighter make his rounds. He adores the blue flare of the spirit lamp. I waited inside the vestry, mending a tear in his cassock. 10 minutes, no more. When I stepped out, her voice splintered. He was gone. I felt the old soldier's instinct to comfort, yet Holmes raised one finger. Silence. He leaned forward until the firelight painted sharp shadows across the hawk-like profile. Describe the precise spot, Miss Wren. Every cobble, every shadow. She closed her eyes. The south porch of St. Botolph's opens onto Houndsditch. The pavement there is flagstone, newly laid last Michaelmas. Snow had fallen all day. The stones were white, unmarked save for the boys' footprints. Timothy's were the smallest. His boots are hand-me-downs from the verger's son. They led 3 paces toward the lamp-post, then simply ceased. Holmes's eyebrow arched. Ceased? As though the child had been lifted bodily into the air. She opened her eyes. They were bright with unshed tears. But that is impossible, is it not? Yet the snow beyond was virgin. No print, no disturbance, not even the brush of a coat tail. Only a perfect circle melted into the snow 9 inches across, as though a hot iron had been pressed there. I could not suppress a murmur. A circle? Good Lord! Holmes sprang to his feet, seized his lens from the mantel, and began pacing the narrow strip between bearskin rug and chemical table. 9 inches, the diameter of a large mince pie tin, or the base of a portable spirit stove. And the envelope you carry, Miss Wren, may I? She placed it in his palm as though it burned her. The crimson paper was heavy, handmade, watermarked with a crest, a sprig of mistletoe entwined about a harp. The seal, when Holmes turned it to the light, revealed a thumbprint in the wax, small, delicate, unmistakably a child's. Holmes' nostrils flared. He sniffed once, delicately. Beeswax, hollyberry dye, and chloroform? Watson, the spirit lamp. Quick! I fetched the little brass lamp from the sideboard. Holmes held the envelope above the flame. The wax softened. The seal parted with a sigh. Inside lay 2 objects, a single golden hair curled like a watch spring, and a scrap of music manuscript no larger than a visiting card. The stave was ruled in violet ink. The notes, in a childish round hand, formed the opening phrase of God rest ye merry, gentlemen. Yet every third note had been altered by a single vicious scratch. Holmes' eyes narrowed to slits. A cipher, Watson, crude but effective. The altered notes are not mistakes. They are deliberate. Count them. 3, strike, 3, strike. A ratio. And the hair, observe the root. He passed me the lens. The root bulb was dark, almost black, though the shaft was bright gold. Recent dye, I said at once. Timothy is fair. Someone wished him to appear otherwise. Miss Wren gave a little cry. Yesterday, he begged me to let him play Joseph in the nativity play. The costume required dark hair. I painted it with walnut juice. Only the roots took the stain. Holmes whirled to the window, flung it open. Snow swept in upon a gust that rattled the inkstand. Below, the street was a river of white. A constable's bullseye lantern bobbed like a firefly. Holmes inhaled the freezing air as though it were the finest Havana. Time is frost, Miss Wren, and frost is the thief's accomplice. Watson, my fur collar, the Persian slipper for tobacco, and the Bradshaw. We leave for St. Botolph's within the quarter hour. He turned, and for the first time the lady smiled, a tremulous thing, like moonlight on ice. You will find him? Holmes bowed. the firelight gilding the edges of his lean face. "Madam, I have deduced the existence of a portable heat source, a chloroform-soaked seal, a child disguised, and a musical cipher. The circle in the snow is the mouth of a tunnel. The tunnel leads to a voice worth stealing. Before the bells of London strike midnight on Christmas Eve, your nephew shall sing beneath your own roof tree, or I am not Sherlock Holmes." He strode to the door, then paused. "One last detail, Miss Wren. The envelope. Did you observe the postmark?" Chapter 2. The Vanishing Choir Boy. The hansom's wheels sang over the frozen ruts of Baker Street, throwing up fans of powdered snow that glittered like diamond dust in the gas lamps. Holmes sat opposite me, collar turned up, eyes half closed, yet I knew his mind was racing faster than the horse. Miss Eleanor Wren clung to the strap, her breath pluming white, the crimson envelope now tucked inside my breast pocket for safekeeping. At every corner the fog pressed closer, thick as wet wool, until London herself seemed to have drawn a veil across her face. We clattered eastward, past the shuttered shops of Oxford Street, beneath the railway arches where icicles hung like dragon's teeth, and down the narrow throat of Houndsditch. St. Botolph's Aldgate rose before us at last, a soot-blackened church whose spire stabbed the low sky. The snow in the churchyard lay unbroken save for a single line of footprints leading to the south porch, then stopping as though the walker had been spirited upward by angels or devils. Holmes sprang down before the cab had fully halted. "Watson, the lantern." Miss Wren remained 3 paces behind. "Your skirts must not disturb the canvas." He knelt, deerstalker brim dripping, and swept the bullseye in a slow arc. The circle was exactly as Eleanor had described, 9 inches across, edges sharp. The snow beneath melted to a coin of ice that reflected the lantern like a dark mirror. I heard his sharp intake of breath. "Observe, Watson. The rim is beveled inward. Whatever pressed here was conical, and hot enough to sink its own depth before the frost reasserted itself." He scraped the ice with a fingernail. Flakes of blackened sugar clung to the nail. Burnt sugar, and beneath it, beeswax. The heat source was a spirit stove no larger than a lady's muff warmer. Eleanor gave a little cry. "Timothy carries a tin of bullseyes in his pocket. He is never without sweets." Holmes' eyes glittered. Then the thief knew his habits. "Come." He rose in one fluid motion and strode beneath the porch. The great oak door stood ajar. A ribbon of candlelight spilled across the flagstones. Inside, the nave was empty, yet the air still trembled with the ghost of boys' voices. Rows of scarlet cassocks hung from pegs like the skins of cardinals. Holmes moved among them, fingertips brushing the wool until he stopped at the smallest. A single golden hair, walnut-stained at the root, clung to the collar. "Timothy's," Eleanor whispered. Holmes plucked it free and held it to the candle. Still warm at the tip. He was wearing this garment less than 20 minutes ago. He whirled, coattails flaring. "Watson, the vestry." We burst through the baize curtain. The vestry was a chaos of hymn books, candle stubs, and a solitary sewing basket overturned upon the table. A torn page of music lay beneath it, the treble line of "Once in Royal David's City," the solo verse ringed in violet ink. Holmes seized it, eyes racing across the staves. "Note the pressure of the pen. The child was hurried, yet the hand is steady. He wrote this willingly or under gentle duress." Eleanor's knees buckled. I caught her elbow. Holmes was already on all fours, nose inches from the floorboards. "Here!" A single drop of crimson wax had fallen between the cracks, still soft. He dug it out with the point of his pocket knife. "Identical to the envelope seal. The boy was brought this way, then carried, marked the smudge of a boot heel where the carrier pivoted. He led us at a run along a narrow passage that smelled of incense and damp stone. It ended at an iron-studded door opening onto the crypt stairs. Holmes flung it wide. The hinges screamed like a lost soul. Cold air breathed upward, carrying the scent of earth, tallow, and something sweeter, burnt sugar again. The crypt was a forest of pillars, each hung with cobwebs thick as lace. Our lantern threw grotesque shadows that danced across the vaults. Holmes moved like a bloodhound, pausing every third step to examine the dust. At the foot of a disused confessional, he stopped. A perfect circle of melted snow had dripped through a grating overhead, forming a second mirror on the flagstones. Beneath the grating lay a child's mitten, scarlet wool, the thumb half chewed. Eleanor pressed it to her lips. His milk teeth marks. Oh, Timothy. Holmes was already prying at the grating with his knife. It lifted with a groan, revealing a shaft no wider than a chimney. A rope ladder, new and tar-smelling, dangled into darkness. He swung himself onto the rungs without hesitation. Watson, the revolver. Miss Wren, courage. The game descends. I followed, heart hammering. The ladder ended in a brick tunnel barely high enough for a man to stoop. The walls wept moisture. Our breath plumed silver. Holmes's lantern picked out a trail. Tiny boot prints in the mud, then nothing. 10 yards farther, the prints reappeared, deeper, as though the carrier had set the boy down to rest. A child's scrawl in violet crayon decorated the brick, a crooked treble clef. Holmes' laughter echoed softly. A message for pursuers. The boy is unharmed and thinking of us. He knelt again. Observe the spacing. The left print is shallower, the carrier limbs favoring the right leg, and here he touched a smear of green, hollyberry dye, identical to the sealing wax. Our thief is festive in his villainy. Chapter 3. Footprints in the Frost. The four-wheeler lurched through the iron dark streets of Bloomsbury, its lamps carving tunnels of gold through the fog. Holmes sat bolt upright, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together as though in prayer. Yet I knew he was listening to every creak of axle and hoofbeat. Eleanor Wren clutched Timothy's scarlet mitten to her heart, the wool still holding the faint warmth of a child's hand. I nursed the copper funnel wrapped in the cassock, its rim still faintly tacky with burnt sugar and chloroform. At Coram's Fields, the gate stood locked, the great ironwork crowned with frost flowers sharp as daggers. Holmes produced a ring of keys, pilfered, I suspected, from the Foundling Hospital's porter during a previous case, and had us inside within 30 seconds. The moon, a silver shilling newly minted, floated above the plane trees. Every twig glittered like spun glass. Our boots crunched across the cricket pitch, leaving black wounds in the snow. Holmes halted at the lip of the ice house mound. It rose before us like a barrow from a Saxon tale, a low hill of brick and earth, its door a slab of oak studded with iron nails the size of coffin tacks. A single set of footprints, broad, heavy, the left heel dragging, led from the wicket gate to the threshold, then vanished beneath the door. No returning prints. The thief was still inside. Holmes knelt, lantern low. Observe, Watson. The stride is 28 inches, yet the depth is uneven. Our limping friend carries a burden of 8 stone, exactly the weight of a 10-year-old choir boy. He brushed snow from the door sill and revealed a circle melted into the frost, 9 inches, beveled inward, sugar-blackened. The signature of our portable stove. He entered within the last quarter hour. Eleanor stifled a sob. Holmes laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. Courage, Miss Wren. The circle is still steaming. Timothy lives. He drew his revolver, a stubby Webley bulldog, and motioned me to do the same. The oak door opened inward on silent hinges. Someone had oiled them that very evening. A breath of air rolled out, sweet and metallic like the inside of a music box. Stone steps spiraled down, each tread glazed with ice that glimmered green under the lantern. Holmes descended first, back to the wall, revolver advanced. I followed, funnel tucked beneath my left arm, right hand steady on the atoms. Eleanor came last, skirts lifted clear of the steps, the mitten pressed to her lips as though to hush her own heartbeat. 20 steps down, the spiral ended in a vaulted chamber 30 feet across. The ceiling was lost in shadow, the floor a mirror of black ice. In the center stood a perfect circle of 12 candles, each guttering in a jam jar, their flames straight as organ pipes. Within the circle lay 12 small bundles, choir boys in scarlet cassocks, wrists bound with velvet ribbon the color of holly berries. They breathed slow and deep, drugged but unharmed. Timothy was not among them. Holmes moved like a panther among the candles, counting under his breath. 12 apostles, 12 days of Christmas. Our thief is a showman. He knelt beside the nearest boy, red-haired, freckled, the verger's son, and sniffed the ribbon. Chloroform, again, but laced with oil of cloves. The dose is calibrated to the ounce. He wishes them asleep, not dead. Eleanor darted from bundle to bundle, whispering names. Peter, Matthew, Luke, but no Timothy. Her voice cracked. The vault swallowed the echo. Holmes' lantern swept the walls. Iron meat hooks dangled from chains. Frost feathers hung from each like frozen lace. At the far side, a second door, this one of riveted iron, stood ajar. A single boot print led toward it, the left heel deeper than the right. Holmes crossed the ice in 3 strides and pressed his eye to the crack. Watson, the funnel, quick! I passed it over. He inverted the copper cone, slid the narrow spout into the gap, and listened through the wide mouth as though it were an ear trumpet. A faint rhythmic ticking drifted up. Clockwork, delicate, fast. Holmes' lips shaped a single word, heart. He eased the door open. Beyond lay a narrower tunnel, brick-lined, its floor scattered with sawdust and sprigs of mistletoe. The ticking grew louder, now overlaid by the thin, pure note of a single violin string plucked again and again. A-E above high C, the top line of a boy's range. Holmes motioned us forward. The tunnel twisted twice, then opened into a cavern no larger than a parish hall. In its center stood a contraption, straight from a nightmare of brass and crystal. A rosewood music box, the size of a coffin, rested upon a pedestal of black marble. Its lid was thrown back. Inside, a forest of silver pins rose and fell, striking tuned bells of Venetian glass. At the heart of the mechanism, suspended in a cage of golden wire, hung a human heart. No, a clockwork heart, gears no larger than lentils, rubies for valves, beating with mechanical precision. And bound to the front of the box, arms spread like a tiny crucified chorister, was Timothy Wren. A leather strap across his chest held him upright. His eyes were wide, pupils pinpricks, yet he was conscious. A silver needle hovered an inch from his throat, poised to prick the skin the instant the mechanism required fresh vibration. Chapter 4. The Crimson Seal. The hour was 3 a.m. when the police van rumbled away from Coram's Fields, its black bulk swallowing Silas Grimm and his broken Caroline. Timothy Wren, wrapped in my ulster, slept against Eleanor's breast while 12 rescued choir boys sang sleepy snatches of In Dulce Jubilo from the straw. Holmes stood apart on the moonlit mound, turning the clockwork heart in his gloved palm as though it were a living thing. The rubies, 7 in all, caught the frostlight and threw it back in tiny bloody sparks. I limped over, shoulder stiff from the tunnel scramble. Will the boy's voice recover, Holmes? He did not look up. Curare never touched the chords, Watson. A night's rest, a posset of honey and lemon, and he will ring the rafters of St. Paul's tomorrow eve. But mark me, the cipher is not ended. Grim was the left hand. Somewhere a right hand still plucks the strings. He slipped the heart into his pocket and started for the gate. Come, dawn is 4 hours distant, and the Crimson Seal has more to tell. We left Eleanor and the children to Lestrade's tender mercies and took a growler back to Baker Street. The fog had thinned to a pearl-gray veil. Every lamp wore a halo the color of candle smoke. Mrs. Hudson, bless her, had kept the fire banked and a kettle singing. She took one look at our frost-rimed faces and vanished kitchenward, returning with a tray, coffee thick as tar, buttered toast cut into soldiers, and a jar of Oxford marmalade glowing like molten topaz. Holmes ignored sustenance. He swept a landslide of papers from the table, laid out the crimson envelope, the music scrap, the copper funnel, the velvet ribbons, and last of all, the clockwork heart. Then he produced a magnifying lens the size of a saucer and began to prowl. I poured coffee. Grim confessed the carillon was commissioned by a gentleman in Pall Mall. Any idea who? Holmes's answer was to strike a match and hold the envelope over the flame. The seal softened. The mistletoe wax released a breath of chloroform and something sweeter, a tar of roses. He peeled the wafer free and laid it flat. Beneath the child's thumbprint lay a second impression, almost invisible, a tiny harp entwined with the letters CAR, coronation regalia, I guessed. Holmes shook his head. Court circular. The harp is the badge of the Royal Philharmonic Society, and the initials. Look closer. He angled the lens. The C was formed by 2 interlocking sickles. The R wore a coronet. Count Rufus de Rotillon, patron of music, dilettante of poisons, and, if rumor speaks true, the Queen's unofficial ear at every premiere. I whistled. Rotillon? The man who filled the Albert Hall with mechanical nightingales last Jubilee? The same. He collects voices the way others collect postage stamps. Grim was his tuner, the ice house his workshop, but the commission came from higher still. He unfolded the music scrap and pinned it beneath a chemist's balance. The altered notes, every third scratched out, now stood revealed as a lattice of pinholes. Holmes held it to the lamp. Light streamed through in 12 perfect beams, projecting on to the wall the outline of a cathedral rose window. I stared. St. Paul's. Exactly. The Christmas Eve service. The beams marked the exact acoustic nodes where a boy's voice will reinforce the dome's resonance. One treble placed on the whispering gallery at the 10th stroke of 10 can make the entire cathedral sing in perfect canon. He spun the clockwork heart. 7 rubies, Watson. 7 notes in the diatonic scale. 7 days left until Christmas. Rotillon intends to insert Timothy's voice into a larger mechanism, one that will ring from every spire in London. Chapter 5. Midnight at the Foundling Hospital. The great clock of St. Paul's had just tolled 4 when our growler rattled back across Blackfriars Bridge. Frost silvered the Thames. Every ripple looked like hammered pewter. Count Rufus de Rotillon sat between us, wrists bound with the crimson sealing-wax cord he had once used to leash children's voices. The copper funnel lay across Holmes's knees, its spout stoppered with a cork of frozen sugar. Inside the bowl, the spirit flame still burned a steady cobalt eye. Holmes spoke without turning. Watson, the map. I unfolded the parchment we had lifted from Rothillion's console, a spiderwork of tunnels radiating from the cathedral crypt like roots beneath a frozen rose. One line, inked in violet, curved northwest beneath Fleet Street, then vanished beneath the words Foundling Hospital, Ice House, Liar. A single date was scrawled beside it. 24/16 Hawaii. Rothillion's laugh was a dry husk. You chase echoes, Mr. Holmes. The lyre is not a place, it is a chord. Strike it, and every spire in London answers. Holmes tapped the map. Strike it we shall, but first we free the chord from its cage. We left the Count in Lestrade's custody at the Ludgate Hill station and took a fresh cab to Coram's Fields. The Foundling Hospital loomed ahead, its Palladian facade glazed with moonlight. The gates were locked for the night, but Holmes had already palmed the porter's spare key during our earlier visit. We slipped through the wicket and crossed the quadrangle, boots silent on the packed snow. A side door beneath the chapel arch stood ajar. Warm air breathed out, scented with beeswax and warm bread. Holmes extinguished the cab lamp and drew us into the shadow of the portico. From within came the measured tread of a single watchman, and beneath it, the faint rhythmic ticking of a large clock. Holmes whispered, "The hospital's old ice house lies beneath the chapel. It was bricked up in 78, but the tunnels remain. Our lyre waits below." He produced a skeleton key and eased the door open. We descended a stone stair that spiraled like a snail shell, each step glazed with black ice. At the bottom, a brick arch opened into a vaulted corridor, lit by a single lantern hung from a meat hook. The air was thick with the smell of tallow and something sweeter. Burnt sugar again. Holmes knelt. Fresh boot prints, left heel dragging, led away, down the corridor, then vanished beneath a fall of fresh snow that had drifted through a grating overhead. He brushed the snow aside and revealed a perfect circle melted into the brick, 9 inches, beveled, sugar blackened. He smiled. Grimm's apprentice returns to the scene of the crime. We are expected. He unstoppered the funnel. The blue flame flared brighter. We followed the corridor until it widened into the ice house proper, a cathedral of frost 30 feet high, its walls hung with icicles thick as organ pipes. In the center stood a frozen mirror, its surface a mirror of black ice. Upon the ice rested a rosewood music box, the twin of Grimm's, but larger, 6 feet long, its lid carved into a lyre of gilded flames. 12 velvet ribbons lay coiled upon the lid like sleeping serpents. A 13th ribbon, gold, not crimson, dangled from the keyhole, its tassel brushing the ice. Holmes lifted the lantern. The flames painted the icicles blood red. He circled the box, tapping the ice with the funnel. Each tap rang a different note, pure, bell-like, ascending the scale. At the 7th tap, the ice answered with a hollow boom. Beneath the mirror lay a second chamber. Holmes knelt, pressed his ear to the ice, and listened. A faint, rhythmic pulsing, tick-tick-tick, like a heart too large for any human breast. He rose. The true lyre. "Watson, your revolver." We descend. He struck the ice with the funnel's base. The surface crazed, then shattered into a perfect circle 9 inches across. Cold water welled, but did not flood. A brick ledge ringed the hole. A rope ladder, tar-smelling and new, dangled into darkness. Holmes swung himself down. I followed, revolver cocked. The ladder ended in a cavern hewn from London clay, its walls dripping with frost. At its center stood the lyre, a harp of brass pipes 30 feet tall, each pipe a boy's height, each mouth stopped with a child's mitten. In the center hung the golden cage, empty, its door ajar. A single figure awaited us, a woman in choir surplice white, hood thrown back to reveal a face I knew from the society pages. Lady Beatrice Lyre, soprano, philanthropist, and, rumor whispered, Rothillion's discarded mistress. In her arms she cradled Timothy Wren, unconscious but breathing, a silver needle poised at his throat. Mr. Holmes, she said, voice clear as winter air, you are early. The 10th stroke is not yet come. Holmes stepped forward, funnel raised like a torch. Lady Beatrice, your patron is in irons, your tuner gagged with his own ribbons. Release the boy. She smiled, sad and terrible. The boy is the key, not the lock. Listen. She touched a pipe. From its mouth poured the recorded voice of every choir boy in London. Hundreds braided into a single, unbearable chord. The cavern shook. Icicles rained like glass daggers. Then the chord resolved into a silence so deep I heard the blood in my ears. Lady Beatrice lifted the needle. One drop of nightshade on the chords, and Timothy becomes the perfect tireless resonator. At the 10th stroke tomorrow, every spire in London will sing my requiem for a voice I lost. Holmes' eyes flicked to the golden cage. I saw it then, a mistletoe berry the size of a quince wedged between the bars. When the cage door closed, the berry would burst, driving the needle home. Holmes spoke softly. Watson, the stove. I unstoppered the funnel. The blue flame roared. He hurled it. The copper cone spun, trailing fire, and struck the ice between Lady Beatrice and the cage. The flame met the sugar lining. Whoosh! A pillar of cobalt fire shot upward, sealing the cage behind a wall of heat. Lady Beatrice flinched. In that instant Holmes lunged. He seized Timothy, rolled, and came up with the boy, shielded behind his coat. I leveled the revolver. Drop the needle, madam, or I fire. She let the silver shard fall. It rang on the ice like a broken bell. Her shoulders sagged. The cord is struck, Mr. Holmes. You cannot unhear it. Holmes laid Timothy gently on the rope ladder. He climbed after, then reached down for my hand. As we ascended, the blue flame guttered and died, leaving only the smell of burnt sugar and the echo of a chord that would haunt me forever. Chapter 6. The Clockmaker's Confession. The first pale blade of Christmas Eve slid between the shutters of 221B at 6:30. I woke to the smell of coffee, cinnamon, and gun oil. Holmes had not slept. He stood at the chemical table in shirt sleeves, the clockwork heart open like a dissected songbird. 7 rubies winked in the spirit lamp's flame. 13 tiny gears lay in a silver dish beside a saucer of blood, my blood drawn with a lancet while I slept. Watson, you snore in D major, he greeted without looking up. Your pulse is 84. The rubies must match it exactly. Hand me the tweezers. I obeyed, still half dreaming of tunnels and frozen chords. Timothy Wren lay on the sofa, cocooned in 3 blankets and Mrs. Hudson's best eiderdown. His cheeks were pink, his breathing steady. Every few minutes he murmured a perfect top E in his sleep. Holmes dropped the final ruby into place. The heart gave a single deliberate tick, then began to beat in perfect synchrony with my own. He closed the cage, wound the key 7 turns, and set it on the mantel. It chimed the Westminster quarters, soft as a lullaby. Alive, he announced, alive and listening. Now we discover who taught it to sing. He spread the icicle map across the table. Icicles, 13 of them, had been numbered in violet ink. Each number corresponded to a child's mitten. Holmes tapped the largest, number 7, the mitten still warm from Timothy's hand. 7 is the keystone. The clockmaker who forged the heart will be found at the 7th stroke of 7, beneath the 7th bridge. He was already shrugging into his ulster. Bring the boy. He is safer with us than with any constable. We left Baker Street in a 4-wheeler whose horse wore straw boots against the ice. Snow still fell, soft and deliberate, erasing yesterday's footprints. Holmes directed the driver south, past the silent bulk of St. Paul's, across the river at London Bridge, then east along the rat run of Tooley Street, until the masts of T-clippers rose like a forest of frozen lances. The seventh bridge was Bermondsey Wall, a hump-backed relic of Tudor brick. Beneath it lay a narrow alley glazed with frost and the smell of boiling sugar. A sign swung in the wind, Herr Klaus Vogel, clockmaker to the crown, musical hearts. A speciality. Holmes pushed the door. A bell of Bohemian crystal rang 7 clear notes. Inside the shop was a cavern of ticking, long-case clocks, bracket clocks, skeleton clocks, all striking the quarter in nervous counterpoint. Golden cherubs spun on wires. Tiny ballerinas pirouetted inside glass domes. At the rear, behind a curtain of velvet ribbons, sat Herr Klaus Vogel himself, small, round, white-bearded, eyes the color of watered milk. He rose with a cry, "Mein Gott, der Junge." He clasped Timothy to his waistcoat, tears freezing on his lashes. "I made the heart, yeah, but I did not know they would cage a living voice." Holmes closed the door against the snow. "Begin at the beginning, Herr Vogel. Every gear, every ruby, every drop of curare." The old man led us through the curtain into a workshop no larger than a confession box. A single argon lamp burned above a bench littered with watchmaker's tools no bigger than eyelashes. On a velvet cushion lay a second clockwork heart, identical to the first, but unfinished. 6 rubies gleamed. The 7th socket was empty. Vogel lifted it with trembling fingers. 7 years ago, the Count Rotilian commissioned a carillon for the Queen's Christmas levee. 12 pipes for the verses, 1 golden cage for the solo. He brought me a lock of hair, golden, like this boy's, and said, "Make the heart beat with a child's pulse." I thought it poetry. I forged the rubies from Bohemian glass, tuned the gears to the Westminster chime, but when I delivered the heart, the Count laughed. He filled the cage with nightshade and sent his tuner to hunt the voice that matched the lock. Timothy stirred, eyes wide. "You made the pretty bird," he whispered. Vogel wept openly. Holmes turned the unfinished heart. "Yet this one is different. The escapement is reversed. Why?" Vogel wiped his glasses. "Because I learned the truth. Last Michaelmas, I followed Grimm to the ice house. I saw the children bound with ribbons. I stole the heart back, replaced it with a dummy. I have been trying to finish a second heart, one that sings freedom instead of silence." He opened a drawer. Inside lay a single ruby, larger than the rest, carved into the shape of a treble clef. I needed a drop of the true singer's blood to tune it. Tonight, at the 7th stroke of 7, I planned to break into the cathedral and swap the hearts, but the snow betrayed my footprints. Holmes' eyes blazed. "Then we have 3 hours until the levee. Watson, the lancet." I hesitated. Timothy rolled up his sleeve without fear. "For the pretty bird," he said. Holmes pricked the boy's finger. 1 perfect crimson bead welled. Vogel caught it on the ruby clef. The gem drank the blood, glowed, and clicked into the empty socket. The heart gave a single, triumphant tick, then burst into the opening phrase of "Once in Royal David's City," played on flute-sweet pipes no larger than a sparrow's bones. Vogel wound the key 7 times. 7 strokes to arm it, 7 to disarm. Place it inside the golden cage before the 10th stroke of 10, and the nightshade needle will fall harmless. The true voice will ring free. Holmes pocketed the heart. "Your confession is noted, Herr Vogel. You will accompany us to St. Paul's as witness. The Queen shall hear how Christmas was saved by a clockmaker's repentance." The old man bowed, tears freezing into tiny diamonds on his beard. Outside, the snow had ceased. The sky was the color of a pigeon's breast. We stepped into the alley. Holmes paused beneath the bridge's arch, and struck the clockwork heart against the brick. Tick, tick, tick. 7 bridges away, Big Ben answered with a single, solemn stroke. Holmes holds the glowing treble clef ruby aloft. Behind him, Herr Vogel's workshop windows spill golden light onto the snow. Timothy's silhouette stands between them, fingers still bleeding, one perfect drop that falls in slow motion toward the heart. The unfinished heart plays the true carol in miniature, then swells into a boy's voice sustained on a single impossible E. 7 clock strikes overlay the melody like a heartbeat. Pause beneath the bridge. Look up. 13 icicles hang like organ pipes. Count the drops of melted snow falling from the 7th. Comment the exact number. Shalom 7 drops, and the first correct answer will wind the final heart in Chapter 7. The Mistletoe Cipher. 7 bells of Christmas Eve were still trembling in the air when our growler skidded to a halt beneath the great west front of St. Paul's. The snow had turned to sleet. Every lamp wore a crown of ice. Holmes leapt down, the true clockwork heart ticking against his ribs like a second pulse. Timothy clung to my hand, eyes round as communion wafers. Herr Vogel followed, clutching a leather satchel that clinked with tiny brass keys. The cathedral doors stood open for the final rehearsal. Candlelight poured out in rivers of gold, and from within rose the massed voices of the choir, 400 boys and men rehearsing the Hallelujah chorus in waves that rattled the stained glass. Holmes paused on the threshold, head cocked. Listen, Watson. The acoustic is perfect until the 10th stroke. Then the dome will swallow every note unless the true heart is in place. We slipped inside. The nave was a forest of pillars and incense. Workmen on scaffolding adjusted garlands of holly and mistletoe. Each berry had been dipped in silver nitrate so that it flashed like a star. A verger in scarlet robe tried to bar us. Holmes flashed the bishop's telegram, and we were waved through. The whispering gallery lay 300 steps above the crossing. We climbed single file, boots echoing on the stone spiral. At the top, the gallery curved like a frozen moon. 12 velvet ribbons, identical to those in the ice house, were tied to the balustrade at precise intervals. A 13th ribbon, gold, fluttered from a small rosewood door set into the dome itself. Holmes knelt. The door was no larger than a violin case, its lock shaped like a treble clef. He produced Vogel's satchel, selected a key of blackened silver, and turned it 7 clicks. The door swung inward on silent hinges. Beyond lay a crawl space lit by a single candle stub. In its pool of light rested the golden cage, empty, the nightshade needle poised above a cushion of crimson velvet. Timothy whispered, "It's waiting for me." Holmes laid a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Not tonight." He opened the cage, removed the dummy heart, and set the true heart in its place. 7 rubies glowed. The treble clef ruby pulsed once, twice, then locked home with a soft snick. Vogel wound the key 7 turns. The mechanism began to tick in perfect counterpoint to the choir below. Holmes closed the cage. Now the cipher. He drew the mistletoe berries from his pocket, 13 of them, each pierced with a pinhole. He threaded them onto the golden ribbon in the order of the icicle map. When the 13th berry clicked against the cage, the ribbon stiffened into a perfect circle. Holmes hung it from the balustrade like a Christmas wreath. "Observe," he murmured. He struck the railing with the copper funnel. Ping! And the berries lit from within, projecting 13 beams of violet light onto the dome. The beams formed a constellation, Lyra, the harp. Where the star Vega should have been, a single word appeared in glowing script. Singer. Timothy's eyes widened. "That's me." Holmes smiled. No, my boy. That is every child who ever raised his voice in hope. Tonight the dome itself will be the singer. He turned to Vogel. The reversal? The clockmaker opened his satchel and produced a second ribbon, this one woven from 13 strands of boy hair, each lock labeled with a name. He tied it around the cage in a lover's knot. At the 10th stroke, he said, the nightshade needle will fall. Into the hair, not the throat. The true heart will drink the poison and sing it into harmony. A sudden clamor rose from the nave. The choir had broken off. Angry voices echoed up the spiral. Holmes leaned over the balustrade. Far below, Count Rothilion, freed on a writ of habeas corpus, strode the aisle in violet velvet, flanked by 2 constables and Lady Beatrice in silver chains. He carried a stopwatch, the twin of Grimm's. Rothilion looked up, saw us, and smiled with the serenity of a hanging judge. Mr. Holmes, the 10th stroke approaches. Yield the boy, or the cathedral will hear only silence. Holmes called down, voice ringing off the dome like a bell. The boy is already singing, Count. Listen. He struck the railing again, ping, and the true heart answered with a single, perfect E. The note soared, circled the whispering gallery, and returned amplified 100-fold. Every silvered mistletoe, berry flashed in answer. The dome itself began to hum. Rothilion's composure cracked. He raised the stopwatch and clicked the stem. Somewhere in the crypt, a counter mechanism engaged. Clank. The golden cage shuddered. The nightshade needle trembled. Holmes acted without hesitation. He seized Timothy, lifted him bodily over the balustrade, and set him on the narrow ledge inside the dome. Sing, lad. Sing as though heaven itself were listening. Timothy drew breath. His small chest swelled. His eyes closed. He sang the opening phrase of Once in Royal David's City. Pure, unwavering, the top E sustained for 12 impossible seconds. The true heart drank the note, amplified it, and hurled it downward in a cascade of golden sound. The effect was instantaneous. Every pipe in the organ answered. Every candle flame bowed. The silver mistletoe berries burst into silent fireworks of violet light. The dome became a living harp, its ribs vibrating in perfect fifths. 400 voices below fell silent, mouths open, as the cathedral itself took up the carol. Rothilion staggered. The stopwatch slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble. Lady Beatrice lifted her chained hands and began to conduct with tears streaming down her face. The constables stood frozen, helmets in hand. Holmes leaned out. The 10th stroke is yours, Count. Spend it in repentance. Big Ben began to strike 10. On the 7th stroke, the nightshade needle fell into the lover's knot of hair. The true heart absorbed the poison, glowed crimson, then white. On the 10th stroke, it burst into a chord so pure that the great west window shivered and rain-colored light across the nave. Timothy's voice soared alone for one heartbeat, then was joined by every choir boy in London, live and free, their voices rising through gratings, tunnels, and open doors. Chapter 8, The Ice House Revelation. The last echo of the 10th stroke had scarcely died when the great west doors of St. Paul's burst open and a wind of snow and bells swept in. 400 choristers stood silent, mouths still shaped to the final Amen, while colored light from the rose window painted every face in living stained glass. Timothy Wren remained on the narrow ledge inside the dome, arms out, a small white figure haloed in frostfire. The golden cage behind him hung open and empty. The true heart had burned itself to a single ruby star that now pulsed once, twice, then fell still. Holmes leaned far over the balustrade. Watson, catch! He tossed something down. I caught it, the treble clef ruby, warm as a coal. It ticked against my palm like a second heart. Below, Count Rothilion lay on the marble, stopwatch shattered, violet velvet streaked with candle wax tears. Lady Beatrice knelt beside him, chains clinking, singing the dying note of the carol in a voice that cracked like ice. Holmes vaulted the balustrade, slid down a holly garland hand over hand, and landed cat-like beside me. He seized the ruby, pressed it to Timothy's lips. The boy inhaled, the gem flared, then dissolved into red gold dust that drifted across the nave and settled on every tongue like communion. 400 voices spoke as one. The seal is broken. A crack ran across the marble floor from the high altar to the font, clean, surgical, straight as a ruler. The crack widened. Frost flowers bloomed along its edges. From the darkness below rose the smell of burnt sugar, a tar of roses, and something older, London earth, river water, and the iron of old bells. Holmes knelt, ear to the crack. "The ice house," he said simply. It was never beneath Coram's fields. It was here all along, under the cathedral, under the city, under Christmas itself. He stood. "Lanterns, gentlemen." Verger, chorister, bishop, and beadle scrambled to obey. Within minutes, a ring of bullseye lanterns ringed the fissure. Holmes produced the copper funnel, unstoppered it, and poured the last of the blue spirit flame into the crack. The flame ran like liquid starlight, racing along invisible channels until the entire nave glowed cobalt from beneath. The marble lifted, slowly, solemnly, on hidden counterweights. A flight of glass stairs spiraled downward, each step etched with a boy's footprint in frost. At the bottom lay the true ice house, a cavern of black ice and silver pipes, its roof the underside of London, dripping with stalactites of frozen Thames water. In the center stood the final carillon, not brass, not rosewood, but living ice sculpted into a harp 30 feet high. Every string was a frozen boy's voice. 13 crystalline throats suspended in mid-note, mouths open, eyes bright with unshed tears. Timothy's string was the highest, the newest, still ringing. Holmes stepped onto the glass stair. I followed, revolver ready. Herr Vogel came last, clutching the empty satchel that had once held redemption. The temperature plunged. Our breath hung in jewels. Holmes raised the funnel like a torch. "Behold the lyre of London," he said. "Every Christmas Eve for 100 years, a single voice has been harvested to keep the city singing. The mistletoe cipher was the invitation, the crimson seal the contract, the 10th stroke the sacrifice. Tonight the contract ends." He walked the circle of frozen voices, tapping each string with the ruby dust. Where the dust touched, the ice melted, not to water, but to music. Each throat released its note. The cavern filled with a chord that rattled my bones and brought tears I could not name. Timothy's string was last. Holmes laid the empty funnel against it. "Sing, lad. Sing yourself free." The boy drew breath, high, pure, limitless. He sang the verse that had begun the adventure, once in royal David's city. The note struck the ice harp like a hammer on crystal. Every string answered. The cavern blazed white. The frozen throats shattered into snowflakes that rose, swirling toward the dome. The glass stairs dissolved beneath our feet. We fell slowly, gently, through a blizzard of boy voices. I landed on the marble of the nave amid a carpet of living snow. Holmes rose beside me, coat white as ermine. Timothy stood in the center of the choir, barefoot, glowing, every inch the Christmas angel. The marble slab settled back into place with a sound like a kissed cheek. The crack vanished. The nave was whole again. 400 choristers exhaled as one. The bishop lifted his crozier and struck the font, bong. and the cathedral bells answered from every spire in London. Holmes brushed snow from his shoulders. The ice house is no more. The voices are returned to their owners. London will sing tonight with living throats. Count Rothillion struggled to his knees. And my carillon? Holmes smiled, thin and terrible. We'll play in Newgate every Christmas morn until you learn the difference between music and murder. Lady Beatrice lifted her chains. Will you free me too? Holmes shook his head. Your sentence is to conduct the freed choir at evensong. Every note you draw from them will be a lash upon your conscience. He turned to Timothy. And you, young soloist, have earned the rest of your voice. Step forward. The bishop himself placed a scarlet cassock about the boy's shoulders. Timothy walked to the lectern, climbed the 3 steps, and faced the vast congregation, 400 choristers, 200 nobles, 1 queen in the royal pew. He opened his mouth. No sound came. A gasp rippled the nave. Rothillion laughed. A cracked sound. Holmes merely waited. Timothy closed his eyes. He lifted both hands as though embracing the dome. Then he sang, not with his throat, but with the cathedral itself. The great rose window flared. Every pane became a mouth. The sound poured out. 400 boy voices braided into one, soaring through the whispering gallery, down the nave, out into the snowy night. The dome answered with a chord that rattled the chandeliers and set the gas jets dancing. Big Ben struck the quarter. The sound mingled with the boy's note until London herself seemed to sing. Bells on every steeple, St. Bride's, St. Clement's, Bow Bells, the Abbey, took up the carol and flung it across the frozen river. Even the muffled bells of the prison hulks answered from the Thames. Timothy sang for 12 minutes without drawing breath. When the final note died, the nave was ankle-deep in snow that had fallen upward from the ice house. Every flake carried a tiny treble clef of frost. The queen rose, eyes bright, and laid her own white glove upon the boy's head. Holmes bowed. Your Majesty, the Christmas secret is exposed. A city sings only when its children are free to raise their voices. Chapter 9. The carol that wasn't the cathedral emptied at 10:30, 400 choristers streaming into the snowy night like scarlet birds released from a cage. Timothy walked between Eleanor and Herr Vogel, voice spent but eyes shining. Holmes and I lingered beneath the great west door, watching the footprints fill with fresh snow. A single crimson envelope lay on the threshold, wax seal intact, addressed in violet ink, to Mr. Sherlock Holmes, deliver by hand before the 11th stroke, or the carol dies forever. Holmes turned it over. The mistletoe seal was perfect, no thumbprint, no chloroform, only a faint pulse beneath the wax, as though something inside still breathed. He slit it with his pocket knife. Inside lay a single sheet of music, the treble line of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, every note correct. Yet the spaces between the notes had been filled with tiny black seeds. Holmes held it to the lantern. Nightshade, he said softly. Enough to silence every choir in England. The final threat. He folded the sheet, tucked it inside his ulster, and started down the steps. I hurried after. Where now? To the place where no carol has ever been sung. We took the last growler in the rank. Holmes gave one word, Billingsgate. The horse slipped on the ice. The driver swore. We clung to the straps as the cab plunged down Ludgate Hill, past the silent fleet, and into the warren of fish wharves where the Thames lay black and starlit. At the end of a crumbling jetty stood a warehouse, no larger than a chapel, its doors sealed with a single golden ribbon. A plaque above read, Liar Cold Storage, East 1840. No admittance on pain of silence. Holmes cut the ribbon. The doors swung inward on oiled hinges. Inside, the temperature fell to Arctic. Our breath froze in jewels. The floor was a single sheet of ice, and in its center rose the final carillon. 12 crystal bells suspended in a ring, each bell a frozen boy's laugh. At the heart stood a music stand of black marble. Upon it lay an open score entitled The Carol That Wasn't. Holmes lifted the score. The staves were blank. He turned the page. On the reverse, in Timothy's round hand, "Sing me awake, Mr. Holmes." From the rafters dropped a single silver needle on a silken thread. It hovered an inch above the blank staves. Holmes understood instantly. The 11th stroke. If the carol is not sung before 11, the needle falls and the nightshade seeds scatter across the city. Every throat will close by dawn. He looked at me. "Watson, your service revolver. Empty the cartridges." I obeyed. He filled the barrel with the black seeds, stoppered it with the wax, and handed it to Timothy. "Your voice is spent, lad. Use mine." Timothy took the revolver like a flute, pressed it to his lips, and blew. No sound came, but the seeds inside began to glow. Holmes struck the nearest crystal bell with the copper funnel, ping, and the glow leapt from seed to bell to bell, until the ring blazed violet. The ice floor cracked. A circle 9 inches wide melted beneath the music stand. From the darkness below rose a rope ladder and the smell of warm bread. Holmes descended first. I followed, revolver now a silent trumpet. Timothy came last, barefoot on the rungs. We emerged into a cavern beneath the Thames itself. The roof dripped with river water. Stalactites of ice hung like chandeliers. In the center stood a single chair carved from driftwood. Upon it sat a boy, no older than Timothy, dressed in rags, throat bound with a crimson ribbon. His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell in perfect time with the ticking of the true heart in Holmes's pocket. Holmes knelt. "The first singer," he whispered, "harvested in 1840, kept alive by the carillon's pulse. Tonight he wakes." He untied the ribbon. The boy opened his eyes, violet, ancient, kind. He opened his mouth. No sound came. Holmes placed the revolver trumpet in his hands. "Sing the carol that wasn't." The boy lifted the barrel, blew, and the cavern filled with a chord older than the city. Every stalactite rang an answering note. The rope ladder blazed with violet fire. Upstairs, the 12 crystal bells shattered into snowflakes that drifted down like blessings. The boy's voice grew stronger. Timothy's treble braided with 100 lost voices, rising through the warehouse out into the night. Big Ben struck the quarter to 11. The chord swelled, resolved, became the true "God rest ye merry, gentlemen." Not the cipher, not the threat, but the carol London had forgotten it knew. At the 11th stroke, the final seed in the revolver glowed white and burst. A single snowflake landed on the boy's tongue. He smiled, closed his eyes, and dissolved into light that streamed upward through the melted circle, through the warehouse, through the city, until every spire in London rang with living bells. Holmes caught the empty revolver as it fell. "The carol lives," he said, "and the singer is free." We climbed the ladder into a warehouse now warm as toast. The ice had melted into a carpet of violets. On the music stand lay a single crimson envelope, empty, seal broken, wax melted into the shape of a perfect treble clef. Timothy picked it up, turned it over, and laughed. The first sound he had made since the dome. Inside was a note in Holmes's own hand, written hours earlier. Chapter 10, Christmas Dawn and the Secret. Exposed dawn crept over London on Christmas morning. Pale rose behind the spires and found us on the embankment. Holmes, Timothy, and I walked east along the river, the boy barefoot on the frost, yet warm as toast. Behind us, every bell in the city still rang the true carol. Ahead, the Thames lay silver and silent, waiting for the sun. Holmes carried the empty crimson envelope like a communion wafer. Timothy carried the copper funnel, now cold and clean. I carried the single ruby star that had survived the true heart's burning. It pulsed once against my palm, tick, then was still. We stopped beneath London Bridge. A hansom waited, its horse wearing a garland of holly. Mrs. Hudson leaned out, cheeks apple bright, arms full of parcels. Breakfast, gentlemen, plum porridge, deviled kidneys, and a goose the size of Westminster. Timothy laughed and ran to her. Holmes followed more slowly, eyes on the envelope. He turned it over. On the back, in fresh violet ink, a final line had appeared. The secret is the song you give away. He smiled, small, genuine, almost shy, and tucked the envelope into Timothy's pocket. Keep it, lad. When you are old enough, open it on a Christmas morning and sing whatever you find. We climbed aboard. The cab lurched forward, bells on the harness jingling in counterpoint to the city. Holmes leaned back, closed his eyes, and spoke so softly only I heard. Watson, the case is closed. 100 frozen voices thawed. One ancient singer freed. One small boy returned to his aunt. Yet the greatest deduction remains. He opened one eye. London sings because children are allowed to be children. That is the only carol worth preserving. We reached Baker Street as the sun cleared the rooftops. Snow lay ankle deep and virgin. Our old footprints from yesterday had vanished. Mrs. Hudson had transformed 221B into a bower. Holly over the mantel, mistletoe above the door, a tree in the bow window blazing with 100 candles. Timothy darted beneath the mistletoe and kissed Eleanor Wren full on the lips. She blushed crimson. Herr Vogel applauded. Lestrade, arriving with warrants, forgot to scowl. Even Inspector Bradstreet hung his helmet on the hat stand and accepted a slice of Yule log. Holmes stood apart by the fire, ruby star in one hand, Stradivarius in the other. He lifted the bow, drew a single note, E above high C, and the candles flared brighter. Every voice in the room answered: Timothy, Eleanor, Vogel, Mrs. Hudson, the constables. The very tea kettle whistling on the hob. The note became a chord, the chord a carol, the carol a city. He played until the ruby star crumbled into red gold dust that drifted across the turkey rug and spelled, for one heartbeat, thank you. Then it was gone. Timothy tugged Holmes's sleeve. Will you come to St. Paul's tonight, sir? I'm to sing the verse again, only this time with every boy in London. Holmes laid the violin in its case. I shall be in the whispering gallery, lad, invisible but listening. He turned to me. Watson, your notebook, the final entry. I opened to a fresh page. He dictated without pause. On the 25th of December, 1894, Sherlock Holmes proved that the purest resonance is not in crystal bells or golden cages, but in the throat of a child allowed to sing for love alone. Case closed. Merry Christmas, he signed with a flourish, then handed the pen to Timothy. The boy added a single treble clef beneath the signature. Mrs. Hudson pinned the page above the mantel between the bullet marks and the Persian slipper. At 11 o'clock, the bells of St. Paul's began the Christmas peal. We trooped out into the snow. Holmes, Timothy, Eleanor, Vogel, Mrs. Hudson, half Scotland Yard, and every neighbor who heard the music. The streets were full. Strangers linked arms. Costermongers gave away oranges. A crossing sweeper led a blind fiddler in a waltz. We reached the cathedral steps as the great doors opened. 400 scarlet cassocks poured out, Timothy at their head, and the choir sang the verse that had started it all. Only now every voice in London joined, from the Queen on her balcony to the match girl on the corner. Holmes stood at the back, collar up, eyes suspiciously bright. I nudged him. Sentiment, Holmes? He watched. Timothy lift his small face to the winter sun. Logic, Watson. A city that sings together stays together. That is the only secret worth exposing. The final note hung in the air, a perfect E that refused to die. Snow began to fall upward, tiny treble clefts of frost rising toward a sky suddenly full of larks. Holmes raised his hand. The ruby dust on his glove caught the light and spelled, for one last heartbeat, "The song is yours." Then the wind took it, and Christmas began. 221B, at sunrise. Holmes silhouetted in the bow window, violin raised. Behind him, London is a single golden chord of bells and boy voices. Across the sky, snowflakes spell Merry Christmas in living frost.